Today's episode is sponsored by the Positively Living Co-working Club. If you're inspired by the topics here but struggle to take action, join us. The Co-working Club provides resources and accountability focused on doing, not networking. Obligers and introverts, this is for you. Get details and join for $20 a month at positivelyproductive.com/resources.
We naturally want to be our authentic selves. When it comes to the imposter syndrome, there are so many different avenues to arrive at it, because if you think of imposter syndrome as a symptom, there's a lot of different symptoms that make up this syndrome. And it can come from all different places. So a lot of different beliefs can make up the behaviors that elicit themselves as imposter syndrome. Some come from overcritical parenting. If you're held to very, very high standards, you'll hold those high standards on yourself that tend to be impossible standards to meet, therefore verifying again and again and again in your life that you're not good enough. So it just goes back to that. So therefore you have to try harder, you have to work longer, you have to do more, you have to be more, until you're exhausting yourself and burning yourself out.
You're listening to the Positively Living Podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Zaratny, founder of Positively Productive Systems and a productivity coach certified in positive psychology and stress management. Join me as we explore ways to live a more proactive, positive life with episodes on productivity, self-awareness, mindset, entrepreneur life, habits and systems, simplicity, fun, and more. I understand overwhelm personally as a multi-passionate entrepreneur, wife and mom to kids and cats, and as a caregiver. I'm here to help you choose what's right for you so you can do less, live more, and breathe easier. Sound good? Let's get to it. Welcome to the Positively Living Podcast. I'm your host, Lisa, and our topic today is something I think we've all experienced. It's called Imposter Syndrome, and true story, it almost kept me from starting this podcast. While I knew my voice was suited to podcasting and that I'd had many wonderful interviews with other podcasters who'd encouraged me to have my own show, I still struggled with the idea of being the one in charge of the content and doing solo episodes, which are now extremely popular and I love doing. I dragged my feet before finally moving past my uncertainties and insecurities and taking action. And now here we are. Positively Living is a top 3% international podcast with over 50 5-star reviews and over 200 episodes, which also places me in the top 3% of podcasters as well. Looking back, I can see how wrong those limiting beliefs were. But I know firsthand how they can paralyze you in the moment, and that's why we need to free ourselves of them. Joining me today to talk about imposter syndrome is Nicole Majik, a dynamic and inspirational catalyst for personal and professional transformation. With her unique blend of expertise, experience, and passion, Nicole empowers individuals to awaken their true potential and embrace a life of purpose, fulfillment, and success. In our conversation, she speaks of living authentically as being free, which I love, and that what drives us to do what we do comes from our needs. She mentions 3: to be safe and secure, loved and accepted, and empowered. I cover something similar in episode 209 about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but what Nicole describes here are the most foundational needs that connect to limiting beliefs, which come from experiences in our formative years. It's a bit startling to think that not having those needs met, at least in a way that we've perceived it, can drive us to things like people-pleasing and perfectionism and fear decades later. But take heart. There is a way to move past these blocks, free yourself of imposter syndrome, and thrive. And Nicole gives us tons of examples on what imposter syndrome may look like, how it's connected to needs, beliefs, and experiences, and the steps we can take to turn it around and heal the past. One thing I want to add from my perspective that I believe will encourage you is that you don't have to free yourself fully in order to keep achieving. You can remove a block at a time and keep taking action while you heal. Feel the fear and do it anyway, right? When Nicole described symptoms in her "You may have imposter syndrome if" list, I felt seen and called out. Still. But then I felt hope because I know I have been able to move forward from these, even while I'm still working on them. And I know you can too. After you listen to this episode, I'd love to know which symptoms were most familiar and what aha moments you had. And I know someone else you know is dealing with this too, so please consider sharing the episode with them, and let's keep spreading the word. Now, let's join Nicole. Nicole, welcome to the Positively Living podcast. I'm excited to finally be able to chat with you.
Lisa, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
So before we dig into the topic du jour, would you please tell us a bit about who you are and, this is my favorite part, what makes you light up?
A little bit about me is my background is in biology and chemistry, and also I have a master's in metaphysics. I specialize in empowering ambitious business owners and team leaders to break free from stagnant routines and achieve rapid growth. Using a proven 4-step process, DASH, I guide my clients to define their desire, align their actions with their aspirations, strategize for success, and then also all along the way, heal the past, whether it's their limiting beliefs, their trauma, or their emotional blocks. What lights me up is that moment in time that everything clicks with my clients, where you make that impact, where you just see them move from this resistance into resilience. And it's just the most brilliant thing.
It's so satisfying. Yeah, exactly. To have that aha moment and limiting beliefs. Yeah, that's a big one. So we are digging into those today, and that's the place to start. Let's understand a bit better what we're talking about today and what they're actually doing to us. So we say limiting beliefs, we say imposter syndrome. Could you please dig into what they are? Are they the same thing? Are they connected? Like, how's this all work?
They're definitely connected because all of our behaviors stem from a belief that we have, or a culmination of different beliefs that we have and that we pull from in different circumstances and situations. Imposter syndrome is kind of an umbrella of a bunch of different behaviors and also feelings and thoughts that we have based on certain beliefs. And usually I notice that a lot of the behaviors that imposter syndrome is a symptom of come from abandonment and shame.
And that was going to be my next question is when we talk about these limiting beliefs and the ones that are in fact the basis for imposter syndrome, where is that coming from? So you said abandonment and shame.
Yes. So when we look at different pieces of imposter syndrome, we look at people pleasing, right? There's fear of judgment, fear of rejection, that feeling like you're a fraud, not good enough. So it turns into different things like people pleasing and having to do everything. There's just this whole big, huge cluster of things that stem from various beliefs. And even those "I'm not worthy and deserving" comes from abandonment and shame. When we dig into it, when we're young and in those 7 years of our lives where we're just in that programmable mode and we're in hypnotic state of when we're born, we don't know anything. We have to learn everything, which means we have to be programmed. And when we're being programmed those first 7 years, we're looking at all the things around us. So whatever our environment is, or whatever we're hearing, seeing, and experiencing, that's what's forming our beliefs, whether it's true or not. So it doesn't matter if it's an actual thing versus how we validate it to ourselves. But when we look at abandonment, it doesn't have to be like, oh, mom or dad left me on the side of the road somewhere, where it's like this big traumatizing thing. It can still be a traumatic event in the eyes of a child who may be in that space of mom or dad is on the phone, and maybe that's what they do for their job. Maybe they're in sales, and kid comes out, let's say you're a 5-year-old Lisa, and you're like, oh my God, I just saw the best thing on this cartoon. I can't wait to tell mom about it. And you run out there and you're like, mom, mom, mom. And she's going, no, 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 like pushing you away. After a couple of times, maybe that happens, but you don't really understand the totality of the situation. So in your mind, you're not important enough. You're not heard. You're not seen. You're not loved. And therefore, you have this abandonment issue that stems from that. And then you're looking to validate that all along the way in future situations.
It's incredible when you think about it, like that these moments can be so defining that our actions in the future can be a continuation of seeking to validate whatever wasn't in that moment.
It's so cool when we look back and evaluate things from the adult mind and being able to have the experiences that we've had post those childhood perceptions and look back and be able to say, oh God, my mom worked 2 jobs, was a single mom. If that's the case, she was doing the best that she could with what she had. And yet it wasn't enough for me at the time. And when you can look back and at least say, okay, well, I forgive us both for this perception. And you can erase the trauma to the extent that you thought you had over it.
You gain perspective, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You mentioned abandonment and shame, and we did talk about shame just recently with Valerie Friedlander on the show and talking about it from the use of it as a tool, if you will. But what's your perspective on shame in this context?
So shame is something is wrong with me. So a lot of times abandonment and shame are kind of linked together because of the fact that when you feel like you're not good enough to receive that love, you start to believe that there must be something wrong with me. The funny thing is that with the abandonment, it turns into that shame when you have this space of, I feel like I'm being abandoned. When we are in that position, we turn to this sense of safety, security, and also being in the space of, okay, if I'm not loved, that I don't feel loved, and we have to love our parent because if we don't, we're going to die because they're the ones that are taking care of us. So we rely on them for our safety and security and survival. And because we're in that survival mode, and if we don't do what we need to do to show love for them, we're not going to receive that safety, security, all that back. So it turns into shame in the sense that instead of stopping love for a parent, we just stop loving ourselves. Because then we have to people please. We have to do what they want us to do. We have to be who they want us to be in order to be taken care of.
Right. And then in order to potentially perceive that love that we were looking for, even if it is for that moment, that attention that we felt that we didn't get. Okay. So that's a pretty heavy background, but it's a good reminder that these things can linger for a very long time. And it's so important that we do look at these things and see them from a different perspective. But let's shift gears here a little bit. And now knowing where the limiting beliefs can come from and the imposter syndrome and abandonment and shame as its foundation, let's jump back to this idea that we have imposter syndrome. And it feels like, everyone I talk to is all like, yep, yeah, I've had it. I've dealt with this. Is it so prevalent because we've all had these abandonment issues? Is it so prevalent for another reason? What's going on there that it seems as prevalent as it does, at least to me? And why do we want to break free from it?
We naturally want to be our authentic selves because deep down inside, we want to just be who we are and be free. When it comes to the imposter syndrome, there are so many different avenues to arrive at it because if you think of imposter syndrome as a symptom, there's a lot of different symptoms that make up this syndrome, right? And it can come from all different places. So a lot of different beliefs can make up the behaviors that elicit themselves as imposter syndrome. Some come from overcritical parenting. If you're held to very, very high standards, you'll hold those high standards on yourself that tend to be impossible standards to meet, therefore verifying again and again and again in your life that you're not good enough. So it just goes back to that. So therefore you have to try harder, you have to work longer, you have to do more, you have to be more until you're exhausting yourself and burning yourself out. Let's kind of revert back a little bit to 3 things that everyone needs to feel fulfilled. The first is to feel safe and secure, which is why in those first years, we just become whatever we need to become in order to survive. If your parents were workaholics or were drug addicts or, something that conditions you into the space of feeling abandoned, you're not going to necessarily feel safe and secure. So you have to become something else in order to get what it is that you're looking for. So that first thing is safety and security. The second thing is feeling loved and being accepted for who we are. And if you don't feel loved and accepted, you're going to feel like you're an outsider, that you don't belong, or that there's something wrong with you. If you don't feel safe and secure, you're not going to trust. And if you're not trusting, you cause yourself to be on the outsider circle instead of being accepted, because you're also afraid of being judged. When you're afraid of being judged, you might hold back, and people can also feel that. So it's a mirror of what you're emitting out in your vibration. The third thing is we all want to be empowered. And when we are empowered, we will work to elevate other people. But when we're not empowered or we don't feel like we're empowered, we try to control the situation. So the more that you try to control a situation, the more out of control that you actually are. And if you're trying to control a situation, if you look at it in terms of your other pieces of this puzzle, if you're trying to control, you don't feel safe and secure. So you're trying to control in order to create that safety and security. You might try to control your relationships or what people know. And in that case, you're trying to control people. So you're not being accepted for who you are. You're only creating a situation that is in this controlled environment that you cannot control, because you can't control other people's actions and behaviors and beliefs either. Communicating and controlling things, you're going to have people pull away from you, and they're not going to want to open up because you're creating non-safety and non-security for those other people. Exactly what you felt, which is why we mirror image each other.
Wow. It seems like it's this loop, right?
I call it a dovetail because a lot of these things, they overlap with each other. That if you don't feel safe and secure, you don't feel loved, if you don't feel like you belong, if you don't feel empowered, your autonomy, your ability to be independent, your trust in others, how you look at how others are treating you, if you feel like you're being treated justly. There's so many different things that come into play. You get the trunk, and then you get the branches, and you get the leaves, right? And it's just like this tree. But your roots, where are they? If your roots are in negative things, you're going to have some challenges and strife. You're going to create more resistance. And a lot of times we become our own battering ram.
Is that what you're talking about when then you have these symptoms essentially that are part of imposter syndrome? So this feels like a good direction to take us now, in that what are we seeing there and what can we do to get beyond that?
So the first step is always awareness.
Oh yeah, you're speaking our language here.
Your beliefs spark a thought and a feeling. And then you act on that thought and that feeling based on whatever that is. So this is why thoughts become things, beliefs become a way of life, your reality. If you think about it as you're creating this space for yourself, and when you act on these subconscious things, you're behaving in ways that you don't understand because you're not aware yet. When you have people that are in your life that can create that awareness for you, for example, this is like a fun one for me to tell because, when you do something and somebody in your life says, oh, when you say that or when you do that, you sound just like Aunt Betty or you sound just like your mother. And you're like, no, I don't want to sound like that person at all. I had one of those moments when I got upset and I yelled at my kids. Oh my gosh, right? And my kids said, when you say that, you sounded just like grandma. And I was like, oh, no, I didn't want to sound like grandma in that situation, right? There may be other things that I wouldn't mind, but that situation, no. I came up with this thing with them and said, okay, we'll have a code word or a phrase or whatever. So we had these code words for different things that when you did something, it would trigger you to stop and just sit in that awareness and be able to make a decision right then and there to change the trajectory of where it was going. So when they would say, let's just say that they said, Mom, you're doing it again. I would be able to stop and be like, okay, all right, guys, just give me 5 minutes. Okay. Wound up about something. Don't mean to take it out on you. Here's what's going to happen next. And we created new ways to be able to stop and trigger a response that I was able to choose where it went. And that's how we create the awareness to change the belief and the behavior around that. If you can tackle it from both angles, changing the belief that created it in the first place, so stripping away the old belief and creating a new belief while you're creating a new behavior, you're taking it from two different angles.
Okay, so awareness, yeah, that's a big topic here. I say self-awareness is our best productivity tool, our best life tool. Loving that. And that is the first step. And then within that, you're talking about like that awareness and being able to catch. Because when you can catch something and you're curious about it, you can make more intentional steps as opposed to being reactive, which we have actually talked about on the podcast. Shantae Golson talked about it in the context of emotional intelligence. We've talked about it with Kristen Kubik on intuition and authenticity. I mean, these are all the things that you're talking about. It's all connected. Before we continue, I wanted to just make sure, it was kind of one of the questions in my brain is, we have these limiting beliefs. We understand where they're coming from. We have these things that we need to be fulfilled, which is probably driving where we're going with, we need these things. We didn't get them. And so now we're searching for them, but we're searching for them with a different kind of coping mechanism, if you will. When it comes to imposter syndrome, when it comes to this set of symptoms, if you will, how are we going to know, oh, that is imposter syndrome, that's what's going on? How do we catch that?
Things that might indicate that you have imposter syndrome. You may be over-preparing, probably for everything. So you have to know everything before you can do something, right? So that's a form of procrastination as well. You're that perfectionist. You feel you're not as good as others might think you are. So you have to constantly everything has to be perfect. That overachiever, right? You have to work really hard to attain success, and you have to be the hardest worker out of everyone. Also, if you are rejecting any success due to your skills and more attribute your accomplishments for like luck, a lot of times people get congratulations. They'll be like, oh, well, so-and-so helped me out with whatever. And they kind of downplay their own skills in getting there. Those types of things then create these behaviors. So if you are doubting yourself because you don't really believe in your skill set or your competence, or people that tend to be self-deprecating, fear of failure, so then you procrastinate, fear of success, because you're afraid that you won't meet expectations. It's difficult to ask for help because you're supposed to know everything. And if you ask for help, it's weakness that, you don't know everything. Or that somebody's going to judge you and think that you're stupid because you should have known that.
Well, they're going to call you out on the fact that you didn't know what you were doing anyhow. It's just going to be proof of what you already thought, right?
Right. Comparing yourself to others, that's the biggest thing. And I always say that we compare our lowest perception of ourselves to our highest perception of that other person. And it's like trying to compare like a walnut to like a palm tree. It doesn't even make any sense.
Over preparing, being a perfectionist, overachieving, always have to getting ready to get ready to get ready because you must have everything in place. And I'm going to go there. I'm going to go there. But I really do feel like women especially feel this because you also see this like correlation in like the job market where they do see a gender difference in who's willing to go for a job with their perceptions of you actually being qualified. I kind of see overlap there anyhow. Also, I see like this checklist and I'm going check, check, check. Tell me not to freak out, Nicole.
All right. Check, 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 check. All right. So let's marry those up with a few things, right? Controlling and overprotective parents. Okay. So they're trying to create some safety and security from their limiting beliefs into your environment. Because let's say if they're controlling or they're overprotective and you can only do this at this time, and or you could hurt yourself. I've heard that with clients that, oh, don't do that. You could hurt yourself. Oh, don't do that. So people get fearful about taking a risk because they're going to get hurt. So their world is not safe. And when your world is not safe, you cannot be in this place of authenticity because it's going to traumatize you.
You just gave me such an aha moment that I have to interject. So thank you for this. When you talked about safety, and of course I'm thinking about it as a parent myself and like, what am I doing to my children, right? Immediately, thinking about those connections, thinking about mine and thinking about both my childhood and my children's childhood. I know there was a lot of love and I believe there was a lot of security, but what you're talking about here is sometimes that there can be plenty of love and like they have a roof over their heads and safety conceptually. However, if you are a worrier or risk averse, that transference can be the lack of safety that you're talking about.
Yes, absolutely. Let's see what else. The high achiever thing, right? So if there was an importance on high achievement, I remember, and this was something that was very traumatizing to me. For a very long time, I had to really get over this one where we always called my dad like Mr. 4.0. And I remembered in history and like those subjects, I was science and math. Like history, I did not like. So if I wasn't really interested in it, I was not going to really apply myself. However, I had to because we had to get these good grades. If you didn't have A's, then you were not worth anything, that kind of thing. And I remembered coming home and I got a 98 on this history test. And I was like, oh my God, my dad's going to be so proud. And my dad was like, well, why wasn't it a 99? How come it wasn't 100? My world just collapsed in that moment. So that high achievement, like if you're put up there on those high expectations, you're holding yourself to those high expectations too. And then feeling that you don't belong or you have social anxiety or the stress of having to perform while not feeling ready or skilled enough maybe, that can trigger real intense feelings of inadequacy. So if you're feeling super insecure about stuff, take a look at why is it that you're feeling insecure. And obviously we've talked about abandonment, whether it's physical or emotional, leads to extreme need to be independent sometimes so that you don't have to rely on others for anything. So toxic independence. I can do everything myself. I don't need anyone.
Toxic independence for sure. Because in all of this, there are aspects of preparing well, being independent. All of these things can be very positive. So I guess the curiosity part, the awareness part is for us to watch these things when they are to the extreme, when they add stress and pressure to our lives, when they feel like it's holding us back somehow. It just feels like maybe beyond us. Like I can feel like when you feel so driven and you're like, I can't not go that far with it or prepare this much or whatever. That's the time I would think you need to start asking, oh, is something going on here that we could be addressing?
Yeah. So when you take a look at the beliefs behind some of these things, so I can give a few examples if we have time for that.
Sure. And it would be great to look at what's behind it. And also, is this a way for us to free ourselves when we do that?
Yes, yes, and yes. Let's take, in order to be loved or accepted, I must be perfect. So the protective layer of that is, if I'm less than perfect, I'm going to be rejected, I'll be judged, I'll be made fun of, I'll be humiliated, something along that line. That's the fear. The protective layer is, if I'm perfect, there's nothing for them to judge. They can't reject me. They can't make fun of me. So it's like you're trying to protect from that thing. So when you look at it, in order to be loved and accepted, I must be perfect. Well, nobody is perfect. And that means that people still love each other, perfect or not perfect. Do you love people who are imperfect? Yes, you do. So you can be loved even if you're imperfect, which you are, and that's okay, right? So accepting yourself is the first thing, of accepting where you are, because that doesn't negate where you can go. So it's just getting your perception about yourself in check that says, okay, well, maybe I'm not perfect, and maybe I'd like to be better in this area. Well, I can work towards getting better in that area, and I don't have to become perfect in it. And hey, if I become perfect in it, great. But all along the way, I'll be loved no matter what.
Right. And you have to know your starting point. I liked Valerie Friedlander was talking about acceptance and reminded us that that doesn't mean approval. It just means acknowledging where you are, right? So to your point, you start where you are. And so you have this awareness, you catch what's going on, you work on the acceptance of it to say, okay, it doesn't mean I approve of it. It's just, this is where I am, and find those layers and kind of debunk them, right? Break it down and say, I immediately wrote logic fallacy statements because that's what it reminds me of. It's sort of that if-then statement, which I geeked out about. So there's a little fun fact about me. And then you're like, ooh, but that doesn't equal that. I don't have to be perfect to be loved, but that's how I felt. So, okay, that's what I'm working with. Now what? So those are some good first steps. Anything else that you want to add to this as we move forward and step out of imposter syndrome?
Once you realize what the belief is and the thought and the feeling that you have around that belief, it's just changing that belief. So by proving it wrong and considering the source of it, where did it come from? Because if your Aunt Betty is trying to tell you financial advice and she's like the biggest gambler and frivolous spender, well, consider the source, right? You're not going to listen to her.
Like you said, the perspective of, especially as adults, because it might have been something that happened earlier on, or not even adulting, but, as an adult that's grown and learned so much more, even 5 years ago, I can look at something with a new lens and go, oh, and then work from there.
That's healing the past, because you kind of go back and you look at some things and you can see, like, what's your responsibility in something that happened in the past, or what's a different perspective to take on it as to why you felt that way, and then dismantling the negative parts of it.
It's beautiful, healing the past. Yeah. And part of that is, of course, our own, not only self-awareness, but self-forgiveness, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
Beautiful. Any other thoughts or anything you wish that I'd asked about this that you want our listener to know?
I do have a YouTube video that goes through a lot of this in a little bit more detail, breaks it down, kind of along the line of most of what I said. And I also do have some other things in there that help you debunk some old beliefs in my YouTube.
Yeah, and that was my next question, is where we can find you online.
You can find me on Facebook, TikTok. I'm not too much on Instagram, but I am on Instagram and YouTube.
We'll make sure to have those links in the show notes. And with that, are you ready to dig into our fun and frequently very informative rapid wrap-up, Nicole?
Sure thing.
In the context of positively living, right? Living our best lives, I'd love for you to share a song, a saying, and a resource of some kind that all contribute to your positively living. So let's start with a song. It could be a favorite, one that's on your mind, one that jazzes you up, whatever.
Oh, I love Jai Jagdish in Dreams.
And how about a saying? It could be a mantra, a quote, something you share, something you have up on your wall that sees you through.
I'm going to go with this one because it has brought me through a lot, and it's something that I go with a lot of my clients because, especially with imposter syndrome and perfectionism stuff, know when good is good enough.
I love that one. I'm a big fan of good enough. Now, how about a resource? It could be a book, an app, really anything that makes life easier for you.
What if it's just yourself and just connecting with what is aligned for you? Because when you can sit with yourself and ask the questions and really understanding your mind, your heart, your gut, and how that helps you make aligned decisions, that is your best resource. Making aligned decisions, not protected decisions.
Oh, that's beautiful. Okay. Now, last but definitely not least, let's share a little gratitude together. What or who contributes to positively living for you?
My family every single day. Waking up and seeing my daughter and everybody that I interact with is just a wonderful piece of how far I've come and the people that I surround myself with versus, many, many years ago where it felt very toxic.
They reflect back your growth to you. That's beautiful.
Yes.
I am so grateful for you, Nicole, and that we connected and that you came and shared your wisdom and that you shine your light so brightly in this world and shared it with us today.
Thank you, Lisa, for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for joining me today. Your time is precious and limited, and I'm honored you chose to spend it with me. If you have feedback, questions, or want to schedule a chat, head to positivelyproductive.com/connect. And if you are looking for any of the resources referenced on the podcast, from books to products to training and more, go to positivelyproductive.com/resources.